It's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator for this evening's program, Meg Honey. Meg teaches advanced placement U.S. history at St. Joseph Notre Dame High School, where she also serves as the social studies department chair. And Meg earned her master's degree in U.S. history from San Jose State University, and her research interests include the civil rights movement, women's history, gender studies, and California history. In addition to her high school teaching, Meg serves as the, I want you to understand this title, Single Subject Credential Program Performance Assessment for California Teachers Coordinator. And as an adjunct professor in the Kalmanovitz School of Education at St. Mary's College. She has taught To Kill a Mockingbird and has led student trips to the South to study the history of the civil rights movement. Meg.
Thank you, Tom. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Yes, that title is a mouthful, so well done. Like Tom said, my name is Meg Honey, and I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank you for joining us for a celebration of one of the most widely read, most influential books in all of American literature, as well as the celebration of the upcoming production of To Kill a Mockingbird playing at the Lesher Center April 1st through the 30th. In 1991, the Library of Congress's Center for the Book cited To Kill a Mockingbird as the book that made a difference in people's life, second only to the Bible. And its publication in 1960 brought light not only to themes of compassion and courage, but also to Alabama's history of racism and civil rights activism. Tonight, I'm going to briefly present some of the major events in Alabama's civil rights history, including two events that scholars believe influenced Harper Lee's writing of To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm going to first start focusing on events that occurred within 5 years of the publication of the novel, and then move to the two galvanizing events that inspired the book's publishing. A short timeline here to kind of give you a framework in which we're going to be talking about. You see some of the events of the modern civil rights movement that took place in Alabama within the 5 years of the book's publishing in 1960. As far as the two events of the 1930s and then later on in 1955, the Scottsboro Boys case in 1931 and then the Emmett Till murder in 1955, Harper Lee cites these as the two events that really shaped her understanding of what it meant to be African American in this country and really inspired her to write To Kill a Mockingbird. Many of you from your study of civil rights are familiar with the Montgomery bus boycott. It is known as sort of the catalyst of the modern civil rights movement. You might be familiar that it was Rosa Parks who was arrested in December of 1955. Where history sort of lets us down and where we don't get the full story is most people understand that Rosa Parks was tired after a long day working as a seamstress and just whimsically happened to be sitting down in a seat that wasn't meant for her. And the truth of the matter was, Rosa Parks was an active member of the NAACP in Montgomery, and she was specifically chosen to be the person to start the bus boycott. So it was not a whimsical place and time that she was there at the seat. The Montgomery bus boycott, like I said, had been organized for years before it actually started. Started primarily by the NAACP president, E.D. Nixon, who created the Montgomery Improvement Association. Because things were so volatile in Montgomery as far as race relations went and as far as segregation went, the Montgomery Improvement Association believed it was the best choice to bring in a young outsider, somebody not from Montgomery, to lead the boycott and then to become the head of the MIA, and that person was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When the boycott started, it did last for over a year. In Montgomery, there was a soaring membership number of the White Citizens Council. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the White Citizens Council, it's what I call the white-collar Ku Klux Klan. These were businessmen, judges, dentists, teachers, doctors, who gathered together in living rooms, who gathered together in the courthouse, and tried to break down the boycott any way possible. Both Dr. King's house and Ralph Abernathy, a leader of the NAACP's homes, were firebombed in Montgomery. Those people who were boycotting the buses, as well as people who were supporting the boycotters, either by carpooling or giving money to the cause, were physically attacked. After over a year of boycott, a city ordinance finally ended segregation, and we know that with the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King rose to national prominence. The next event, both of these, of course, happened before the publication of To Kill a Mockingbird, was Autherine Lucy's attempt to desegregate the University of Alabama in 1956. Miss Lucy was a graduate student. She was attempting to enroll in the graduate program of library science, which I think is especially relevant for us here tonight. The university, within days of her starting in February of 1956, suspended her for her own safety because violent mobs assembled every day to try to prevent her from going to class. When Miss Lucy and her lawyers from the NAACP tried to turn over the suspension, the University of Alabama expelled her and said, you know, you are putting a bad name out about our university, you know, you're expelled. So she never even had the opportunity to become a student at the University of Alabama. The picture on the right side of the slide are a group of segregationists, some students, some just you know, rebel-rousers who were coming as part of these violent mobs. And what they are burning is desegregationist literature. They're also burning the NAACP magazines and newspapers, and they did this every day that Miss Lucy tried to you know, go to class. This is what she was met with. And there, of course, is a picture of Autherine Lucy on her first day of school in February of 1956. The next event, again, all of these taking place in the state of Alabama, is the Birmingham Children's Crusade of 1963. At this time, Birmingham was known as the most segregated city in the United States. It was affectionately known, and I say that rather sarcastically, as Bombingham, because of the amount of bombs that had been you know, placed at black-owned businesses, churches, and schools. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, organized several peaceful protests. They boycotted Birmingham merchants. They organized marches in the streets. And at this time, Dr. King and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was a leader in Birmingham, decided to do something really risky in Birmingham. And they said, if we want our plight to get national attention, we need to bring children into this crusade. And so what Dr. King and Fred Shuttlesworth did is, from the church pulpits and from you know, the school meetings, they recruited children to come out and march and protest what was happening in Birmingham. And in May 1963, the racist police commissioner, Bull Connor, said, well, if you're going to send children out, children are going to pay the consequences. And he turned police attack dogs on children as young as 8 and 9 years old. The iconic image that you're seeing here are teenagers, and the fire hoses that Bull Connor and the Birmingham Fire Department used were strong enough to strip the bark off of trees. So this is what you're seeing in this image. Dr. King and Fred Shuttlesworth were right, though. The nation saw these images and were horrified and were galvanized into action. Like I said, this happened in May of 1963, and just a month later in June, John F. Kennedy would go on national television and unroll his plan for civil rights. As we know, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, so he never saw his legislation through. It would be Lyndon Johnson that would push the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But it was these images from Birmingham that really stirred a nation. In September of 1963, one of the saddest, most tragic events of the civil rights movement occurred, and this was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. The church was a site of great civil rights action. There had been mass meetings. It was a place of social activism. And a bomb was set to go off 10 a.m. on Sunday morning in September of 1963. The 4 girls killed, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins, and Denise McNair were killed, but hundreds more were wounded. And the Ku Klux Klan were identified as the culprits. Unfortunately, in 1963, I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, because blacks could not safely even register to vote, they weren't eligible to be jurors, in the legal system. So the Ku Klux Klan members were tried by juries of all white men. The 2 leaders of the attack, Thomas Blanton and Bobby Frank Cherry, were found innocent again and again and again. And it wouldn't be until an investigative reporter with the Clarion Ledger in Mississippi would uncover the case and bring new evidence that these 2 men would finally be brought to justice, not until 2001. In 1965, also in Alabama, we had the voting rights march from Selma to Montgomery. The march would take 3 attempts to finally be successful. Selma is a small town located about 50 miles from Alabama's capital in Montgomery. The 2 leaders of the march were men, one Hosea Williams, who was a close friend of Dr. King. Hosea Williams was actually on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis when Dr. King was assassinated. The other leader of the Selma to Montgomery march was Congressman John Lewis, who is still a congressman serving the state of Georgia. The image that you see there is a 23-year-old John Lewis being attacked by Sheriff Jim Clark's posse, who were rounded up to meet the marchers at the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Like I said, it would take 3 attempts for this march to actually take place. The first march, known as Bloody Sunday, was also televised to a national audience. The day that Bloody Sunday took place, the nation was watching a miniseries called...
May I have your attention, please? The library will close in 15 minutes. If you have items to check out, please proceed to the nearest self-check machine at this time. If you need a new library card, or if you need help finding something, please come to the help desk now. All photocopying, printing, and internet use should be...
Well, you're all VIPs here, staying late at the library. All right. When Bloody Sunday occurred, the nation was watching a miniseries on television, Trials at Nuremberg, and the coverage of the miniseries was interrupted with coverage of protesters being beat in the streets of Selma, and people at home were watching thinking, is this really happening in the United States of America? These people who are peacefully marching for voting rights, which they should have had with the 15th and 19th Amendments, were brutally attacked, but it did bring the nation to the struggle. Martin Luther King came. He tried to lead the second march, which was also turned away, and finally the third march took place. The marchers, like I said, started in Selma and ended in Montgomery, and Dr. King gave one of his most famous speeches at the same place on the Montgomery Capitol steps where Governor George Wallace had given his segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever speech. So it was a wonderful and powerful moment for the movement. Like I said, there were 2 big events that really shaped Harper Lee's understanding of civil rights and really inspired her to write the book. And the first, again, took place in Alabama. It's the Scottsboro Boys case, and it happened in 1931. As you all know, 1931, this country was in the height of the Great Depression, and many young people searching for work did what was called riding the rails, and they would jump on train cars and hitch rides to different cities looking for work. In 1931, this was the case, and a group of boys jumped on the train. A fight broke out, and the white boys were pushed off the train by a group of African-American young men. When the train arrived at Paint Rock, the white boys who had been pushed off the train reported to the sheriff what had happened, and in Paint Rock, a posse had gathered to arrest the black boys who were still on the train. At the same time, 2 women, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, who were traveling on the train in a completely different compartment, reported that they had been raped by the 9 boys. The white boys who had initially reported the crime also confirmed the story. As far as Victoria Price and Ruby Bates are concerned, however, they were both prostitutes traveling illegally because the Mann Act said you weren't allowed to cross state or county lines for immoral purposes. So they themselves knew that they were acting illegally and used the rape story to get themselves out of trouble. As you can imagine, the 9 Scottsboro boys went to trial. They were represented by volunteer lawyers who were ill-equipped to deal with the defense. And even though the evidence was full of holes, all of the boys except one were sentenced to death. The youngest, who was 13 at the time, was sentenced to life in prison. And I use the information about the Scottsboro boys, and I'm going to give you the rest of the story in a moment. When you look at To Kill a Mockingbird and look at the trial of Tom Robinson, also put on trial for falsely being accused of raping a white woman, it gives you a very strong context about the sexual mores in the South, all the way through, the 1970s and 1980s, the taboo nature of a African-American man and a white woman. And it was a very real scare for people in the South. The Scottsboro boys had a tremendous outpouring of support, but their support was quite controversial. The groups that supported the Scottsboro boys the most strongly was the American Communist Party. And in 1931, it was hard to say if you wanted the support of the American Communist Party. Throughout the Civil Rights Movement, the Communist Party would point to what was happening in the South as sort of the proof that American democracy does not work, and here's why. But they printed out all kinds of leaflets and put out information trying to get support for the boys and for their cause. The case eventually went to the Supreme Court in Powell v. Alabama. The trials said they were invalid because the boys did not have proper representation from a lawyer. One of the boys, Haywood Patterson, was given a new trial. By this point, one of the women, Ruby Bates, had retracted her testimony. The doctor also testified that there had been no visible evidence of rape. Sadly, though, in Alabama, with a jury of all white men, Patterson was still found guilty. The judge threw out the case. He was tried again with another boy, and they were convicted again. The case went to the Supreme Court in 1935. The Supreme Court, again, ruled that the trial was invalid. There were no blacks on the jury. Alabama decided to try the defendants again. The trials lasted well into the 1940s. And even after 2 Supreme Court overturning, 5 of the boys were given life sentences and 4 were released. Very sadly, with the Scottsboro stories, those that were in prison have all passed away. One of them tried to escape prison and was shot, and it was a very, very sad story. Those of you that are interested in the Scottsboro story, there is a wonderful book by Dan T. Carter called Scottsboro, The Tragedy of the American South, and I highly recommend it. He makes several connections to Kill a Mockingbird and really brings the context alive. The final event that I'd like to put some emphasis on to give us a historical context was the Emmett Till murder. This is the only event that took place outside of Alabama. This happened in Money, Mississippi in 1955. And if you speak to any veteran of the civil rights movement, most will say it was the Emmett Till murder that really inspired them to action. As far as who Emmett Till was, he was a 14-year-old boy born and raised in Chicago, and he decided to spend the summer with his cousins in Money, Mississippi. On a dare, he was leaving the drugstore, and he said, "Bye, baby," to Carolyn Bryant, who was the owner's wife. And once Bryant's wife and brother-in-law found out about this, they went to Emmett Till's uncle's house in the middle of the night, kidnapped 14-year-old Till, tortured him, shot him in the head, and tied a 75-pound cotton gin fan around his neck and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. You can see from the 2 images there, Emmett Till was unrecognizable after the torture and being in the river. He was only identified because he had a signet ring that he wore that had been his father's. What makes this event, though, so galvanizing is Mamie Till, Emmett's mother, did something really brave with her son's body. After it was shipped back to Chicago, Mamie said, "I want the world to see what racism has done to my son." So she had an open casket funeral, and she had Jet magazine, one of the most influential publications for African Americans, publish the images of Emmett Till and what he looked like after this ordeal. And again, this is why I say people saw these images and were never the same. So, as we look at these different events, it gives us, again, a historical context, but it also really shows us why Harper Lee was so moved and inspired to write To Kill a Mockingbird. Those of you that know anything about Harper Lee also know that, like Scout, Harper Lee's father, Amasa, was a civil rights lawyer. He tried several civil rights cases, so she had her own experience with a lot of what was happening at this time. The rest of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Butler in a moment. We're going to be very lucky to see 2 scenes from the production of To Kill a Mockingbird. I will also have several questions from for our panel about the work, and then you'll have an opportunity to either ask me questions about the history or for our wonderful actors and director as well. So at this time, I'd like to bring up Michael Butler.
Come on, Dan. And the actors who have graciously agreed to join us, I thank you very much. We're very honored to be here. It's a real pleasure. This is a little unusual. We start rehearsals next week. So we're all sort of meeting. They're meeting each other for the first time tonight, actually. And that's very unusual, actually. First rehearsal is often the place where we all meet for the first time. We're all introduced to the material for the first time. So this is a little preview for us and kind of exciting and fun. So I want to introduce our actors. This is Olivia Lowe, who is, as you may have guessed, our scout. Olivia is a student, of course, I think at Julia Morgan, is that right? Yeah. And also, for quite a few years now, has been a student at our Young Rep, our summer intensive training program, and is also in our production of A Christmas Carol. Was this the first year you were in it? Yes. So already in her career has had quite a lot of work with Center Rep. On your extreme left is Joseph Ingram, who's playing Tom Robinson. Joseph is a young, up-and-coming, hotshot Bay Area actor and recent graduate of San Francisco University, and we're very lucky to have him in the cast. And in the middle is Dan Hiatt. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit now, Dan, but I have to say I was so pleased that Dan was available and interested to play Atticus Finch in our production of To Kill a Mockingbird. Dan is truly one of the finest actors in the Bay Area, veteran of ACT, Berkeley Rep, Cal Shakes, and many of the major regional theaters around the country, and I think really born to play this role. So this is very exciting for me. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for being here. And we're going to read a couple scenes from the play. First, we're going to read a scene from the trial scene. Let me set that up a little bit, and then we're going to talk a little bit, and then read an Atticus Scout scene. So the trial scene is the second half of the book and the second half of the play. At this point, when Atticus is questioning Tom Robinson, his sole witness for the defense, we've already seen Bob Ewell, the accuser, be interrogated by Atticus, and we've learned that wonderful thing about that he's actually left-handed, and we've learned that Mayella, his daughter, was probably beaten by someone who was left-handed. Mayella herself has been on the stand, and we've learned a lot about that the terrible poverty and abuse in which she is grown up and lives. And that's a really interesting aspect of the story that people don't talk about, that you have 2 motherless girls in the book and in the play. You have Scout and you have Mayella Ewell, and it could not be more different in their upbringing, their experience, and what has become of them. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the story. And so the prosecution has presented its case, and now it's up to the defense, and Atticus calls his one witness for the defense, Tom Robinson, who we all know to be innocent. And we're picking up this scene about a third of the way into his questions for Tom Robinson. I'm just going to sit here. Yeah.
Tom, what happened to you on the evening of May 21st?
Mr. Finch, I was going home as usual that evening, and when I passed the Ewell place, Miss Mayell was on the porch like she said she were. She called me to come here and help her for a minute. And well, I went inside the fence and looked out for some kindling to work on. But I didn't see none. And she said, "No, I got something for you to do in the house." And the other door off the hinges. I said, "You got a screwdriver, Miss Mayella?" She said she had. Well, I went in and looked at the door. I said, "Miss Mayella, this door looks all right. Those hinges look all right." Then I shut the door, Mr. Finch. I was wondering why it was so quiet, and it came to me that there were no children in the place. Not one of them. And I said, "Miss Mayella, where are the children?"
Go on, Tom.
I said, where are the children? And she said, she laughed sort of. She said, "They're all gone to town and get ice creams." She said, "Took me a slap a year to save them nickels, but I done it. They all got to town."
Tom, what did you say then?
I said something like, "Why, Miss Mayell, that's right smart of you to treat them like that." And she said, "You think so?" I didn't think she understood what I was talking. I meant she was smart of her to save like that. It was nice to treat them like that.
I understand. Go on.
I said, "I best be going. I couldn't do nothing for her." And she said, "Oh, yes, you could." And I asked, "What?" And she said, "Just to step off the chair on yonder and get that box down from the top shelf road."
Not the same one you busted up.
"Oh, no, sir." And not another one. The most tall of the room. So I done what she told me. And I was just reaching, and when she grabbed me right around the legs, Mr. Finch. I was scared so bad I hopped down and turned over the chair over. That was the only thing in the furniture that was stirring in the room. Mr. Finch, is when I left it. I swear for God.
What happened after that? Tom, you've sworn to tell the whole truth.
When I got down off the chair, she sort of jumped at me.
Jumped? Violently?
No, sir. She hugged me. She hugged me. She hugged me around the waist.
Tom, what did she do then?
She reached up and kissed me on the side of the face. She said she never kissed a grown man before, and she might as well start with a nigger. She said, "What happened to a papa doesn't count." She says, "Kiss me back, nigger." I said, "Miss Mayell, let me out of here. I tried to run, but she got her back to the door. And I said, 'Let me pass,' but just when I said it, Miss Ewell yonder hollered through the window.
Well, what did he say?
Something not fit to say.
Tom.
Not fit to say through all these children to hear.
Tom, you must tell the jury what he said.
He said, "You goddamn whore, I'll kill you."
And then what happened?
I was running so fast, Mr. Finch, I didn't know what happened.
Tom, did you rape Mayella Ewell?
No, I did not, sir.
Did you harm her in any way?
I did not.
Did you resist her advances?
Mr. Finch, I tried to, and not without being ugly, sir. I didn't want to. I don't want to be ugly. I just didn't want to push her away or nothing.
All right. Well, let's go back to Mr. Ewell. Who was he talking to?
He was talking and looking at Miss Mayella.
Then you ran.
I sure did.
Why did you run?
I was scared, sir.
Well, why were you scared?
Mr. Finch, if you was a colored man like me, you'd be scared too.
Did this help at all? Because it was really hard.
Thank you so much. Like I said, at this point in the presentation, we are going to start our questions for our panel here. And my first question is for Michael. Michael, I am interested to know why you decided to choose To Kill a Mockingbird. How does it fit into the center of season? And In your opinion, why is the story now 50 years old still relevant in this post-racial society?
Oh, is it post-racial? I didn't know that. I think it is switch? Oh my God, this is so complicated. I think it's pretty clear, actually, that it's probably still one of the most important stories to tell. It's such a part of our history and our national character that I think even long after we become truly post-racial, it will still be important to visit these stories and to tell them again, because history needs to be told and retold, and the lessons need to be learned. I mean, it's so clear, actually, and often so clear when we look at other cultures and other societies. But I think this very tender, loving story that deals with this issue makes it all the more valuable and important to visit this particular story. Center Rep's mission is to do theater that's visually astonishing, emotionally engaging, and intellectually involving. And I think this material certainly fills those objectives, and this production, I hope, will be visually astonishing. So that was a big part of choosing it. I like to pick titles that have a resonance for the audience, and as Meg pointed out, I mean, it's maybe the second most read book in the world. So all of those components played into us deciding to do it.
With that being said, for all of you, what do you see are the challenges in mounting this production of such an iconic novel, and then of course the iconic film with Gregory Peck? What are those challenges, and can you talk a little bit about your choices that you are? I know that we haven't started rehearsal yet, but choices in costumes, in sets, how you see this production, especially because of its iconic nature.
Yeah, if it's okay, I got to let Dan talk about that in a second. But in terms of the production, it's actually going to be a little different. We are dealing with a new version of the script, which is very exciting. There are basically 3 locations in the play. There's the Finch house, porch, and neighborhood, which is the major location. There's the jail, where Atticus goes with the light bulb because he thinks the mob is coming to get Tom Robinson. Oh, the front row can't hear me. Okay, I don't think we have a microphone for that. I'll just project more. And the third location is the courtroom, of course. But I was really interested in the idea that for most people, the book is the source material. And when we read a book, it exists in our mind, in our imagination. It has detail, but where it really exists is in our mind. And the one thing I didn't want to do is cut out the audience from that process by putting the neighborhood up on stage in a very literal, hyper-naturalistic way. I sort of wanted to create the experience of reading the book on stage as much as possible. So what we have is a very evocative landscape that we're playing the play on, but it is not a very literal one at all. So you're not going to see all the little houses with the little screen doors and all the supernaturalistic details. The audience is going to have to supply that with their own imagination, which is how good theater almost always works best anyways. And as far as the actors, I know Dan has had to talk about this a little bit in an interview he did. Maybe Dan, could you talk a little bit about taking on Atticus Finch and just some of the things you're thinking about it?
Sure, I'll do my best. Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the film, which is, I'm sure, indelible in a lot of people's minds, and Gregory Peck's performance and all of that. So in getting past that and not trying to impersonate that in any way, I think the main thing I'm doing is focusing on the book. And I'm already there. It's wonderful to do a play that's based on a novel or a work of literature, because you have so much narrative to draw from, so much detailed description of Atticus and his habits and what he does, even in the courtroom, his demeanor in the courtroom. And my interest at this point, and who knows what will happen 3 weeks from now, but my interest at this point is to go from there and to really take from the book as much detail as I can and use that in the play. And I think in doing that, then that automatically gets me past any kind of impersonation of the movie. I think it's a great idea that we're doing more of a unit set and less of a specific scene for the houses and so forth, because I think unless you can do all three of the locations in a very detailed way, which is probably impossible for most theaters to do, to have a detailed exterior courthouse, a detailed neighborhood, and a detailed courtroom, then it's better. You're better off just to allow an abstract set to exist and to illustrate things through the imagination, and a prop here and a piece of scenery there, I think is, as Michael says, more akin to the experience of reading a book. We can't really compete with film. We can't really go to the specific realistic locations. So I think we're better off doing what theater does best and doing it in a theatrical way, a way that leaves a lot to the imagination. And each of you can fill that in as you watch the show.
Yeah. That's great.
Olivia, I'm going to put you on the spot because you and I spoke just before the presentation. I know that you said you read To Kill a Mockingbird with your 8th grade class this year. Did you find attributes about Scout that you identified with, that you really connected with even before this whole process began?
Definitely. I find her a very strong girl, which is a great role model for so many young girls today. And going to an all-girls school, we really talked about relating to her and how her character contributes to the book, and I feel I was really excited to get the chance to play her, because there's parts of her that I really relate to, and other parts are I'm not like. So it's going to be a great experience learning about her, and I can learn about myself at the same time. Fun.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. We have heard so much recently about the renewed controversy surrounding the N-word, especially with works like Huckleberry Finn. Can you discuss the process and challenges, the nature of the use of the N-word in the play, and how do you plan on handling this very sensitive topic?
It is in the play, and I do plan on talking on the first day of rehearsal, talking to the cast about that, because I personally feel like it's a very powerful word, and I think I plan on referring to it as the N-word when talking about it or when it has to be used, except in the play. I feel like it's important that we really respect that it is a powerful word and symbol, and not diminish it. I have felt like the only thing that I'm slightly disappointed in the material, and Joe, maybe you can talk about this, but I feel like the African American community of the world of that book and play is a little underrepresented in the script. I'm not sure how to deal with that. There are 3 cast members who are African American: Tom Robinson, Calpurnia, and Reverend Sykes. And sort of going into unknown territory a little bit, and I think all I can do is just try to be as forthright and respectful as possible, and really acknowledge the power and history of it. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to add or say?
Well, like you said, we just got stay true to what we have here. You can't sit there and act like it just never came around and never was used or anything like that. So I mean, I mean, and the fact that nowadays people now kind of use it more as a term of endearment. And,
Joseph,
you know,
I'm sorry, can you put the microphone a little closer?
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. It's it's kind of sad to see that nowadays it's kind of used a little bit more as a term of endearment nowadays. Like as much as I don't like using the word and all that, you do eventually hear it. And the thing about using it in this text, it's still going to be represented and respected in this sense. Obviously it wouldn't be as much of a play if it was just riddled with N-words everywhere to go. I don't think it would have much. It wouldn't sound as much as better. But for me, this was mainly in the South. This was how it was happening, and she wouldn't have put it in there in the way she had it if it wasn't going to be something to affect people. Let people know what was happening, what people were saying to people, and all that. So as long as it's staying true to what's happening with the people going down in the South and in Alabama and all that, as long as it's keeping respect to that, that's one thing I like to take. I feel that something that I shouldn't think like, oh, I shouldn't think about this anymore. It's something that has happened and it's going to be happening. So I have to acknowledge that, keep true to it.
Joseph, I think you bring up a very powerful point about the evolution of the word too, from the most racist, hateful term to, like you said, now a term of endearment or a term that's very prevalent in film and in music. I talk to my students a lot about that. I think it's a very important point you're making. I know, again, that you have not started your rehearsal process yet, but as far as taking on this work, what are you all most excited about, and do you have any anxiety or nervousness about it? I'm very eager to hear from all of you about this process.
Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, I got the mic right now. So. Okay. I'm pretty excited for this one. I just graduated from San Francisco State not too long ago, last year, and this is like my first major theater gig performing right now. So I'm like really stoked for it.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
After that, I did a whole bunch of other shows, throughout, the collegiate years, in college and all that. But now that I'm doing something outside of the school, it's a whole different world. It's like, oh man, look at this, lights, camera, and everything, people everywhere. So it's good. Something I'm really interested in getting into.
Dan?
Well, Atticus is such a the story I think is one of the best stories that I know of in American literature, and I think as we've said before, this book for a lot of people was maybe one of the first exciting novel experiences that you get as a kid, as a young adult reading this book. And I don't think the story ever gets old. I was just putting the lines down today to have a way to cue myself in starting to learn the lines, and I just, I couldn't get through the speech just talking into a tape recorder of Atticus Finch's summation in the courtroom. I just couldn't get through it because I started to well up, and it was, it's just such a powerful story that I can't wait to get going on it. And I think the way to approach it is with the simplest truth that you possibly can, drawn from the book and from experience, and just go at it from there.
I am very excited. I've been counting down the weeks and the days. So I'm very excited for this to start. Especially studying in school, I've really developed a love for this story, and I'm really excited to get a chance to share the story with people who want to come see it. So come see it, because it'll be great.
All right. I'll tell you what I'm excited about, and I'll tell you what I'm nervous about. I'm really excited to go back to a kind of theater rehearsal process where we're really going to have to invent how we do a lot of the magic actually in the rehearsal hall. Obviously, I've thought a lot about it and I've devised a lot of things, but I've left a lot of room for us to create how we're going to make Boo Radley's tree, and how we're going to make certain aspects of the neighborhood, because they're not there in the actual physical production. So we're going to have to actually invent it. That's very exciting to me. There's a lot of scenes that are just Scout, her brother Jem, and their friend Dill, and I've never worked with 3 children or young people before, and I'm a little, I'll say it, I just haven't done it, so that's really new for me. We're always apprehensive about something that's new. I'm looking forward to it, but I don't know what it's going to be like. Although I'm very encouraged by her enthusiasm and marketing skills, so I think we may be in great shape.
Indeed. Dan, I really relate to what you're saying. I cannot get through the scene in the courtroom when Reverend Sykes says, "Stand up, children.
Oh, I know.
Your father's passing." I can barely even say that without being totally emotionally taken over. So I certainly relate to what you're saying. We are very excited to see this production, are we not? Is this going to be a dynamic production? And with that being said, I would like to go ahead and get into our second scene with Atticus and Scout.
Yes, this is from the first act. So chronologically, it's prior to the scene we did before. But I felt like this one contains a lot of the heart of the play and the themes in the play. Scout has just heard that Tom Robinson has been accused of rape, and she doesn't even know what that is. There's a lot she still doesn't know. And because she's Scout, and because he's Atticus, she just asks him. And it's a beautiful scene.
Hello, honey.
Atticus, what's rape?
What was that again?
Well, Mrs. DeBose said that Tom Robinson could run around and rape up the whole countryside for all you care. I asked Calpurnia, and she told me to ask you. So now I'm asking you.
Rape is carnal knowledge of a female by force.
If that's all it is, why did Calpurnia dry up when I asked her? Atticus, do you defend niggers?
Of course I do. Don't say nigger, Scout. That's common.
That's what everybody at school says.
Well, from now on, it'll be everybody at less one.
Do all lawyers defend Negroes?
Of course they do.
Then why did Mrs. DeBose make it sound like you're running a still?
Why reasonable people go stark raving mad when anything involving a Negro comes up is something I don't pretend to understand. Come on, Scout. I'm simply defending a Negro. His name is Tom Robinson. He's a member of Calpurnia's church, and Cal knows his family well. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet, but there's been some hot talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man.
If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it?
For a number of reasons. The main one is, if I didn't defend him, I couldn't hold up my head in this town. I couldn't even tell you or Jim not to do something again.
You mean Jem and me wouldn't have to mind you anymore?
That's about right.
Why?
Well, because I could never ask you to mind me again. Tell the truth, I'd hoped to get through life without a case of this kind, but simply by the nature of the work, every lawyer gets at least one. This one's mine, I guess.
Are we gonna win it?
No, honey.
Then what?
Well, simply because we were licked 100 years before we started, there's no reason for us not to try to win.
You sound like an old Confederate veteran.
Only it's different this time. We aren't fighting the Yankees, we're fighting our friends. But remember this, no matter how bitter things get, they're still our friends, and this is still our home.
Is there something I can do for you, Atticus?
Just hold your head high and keep your fists down. You might hear some ugly talk this summer. No matter what anybody says to you, Don't you let 'em get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change, Scout. You got a good one. It's not fair for you and Jim, I know that. But sometimes we have to make the best of things. All I can say is, when you and Jim are grown, maybe you look back on this with some feelings that I didn't let you down.
Atticus, you must be wrong.
How's that?
Well, most folks seem to think that they're right and you're wrong.
They're certainly entitled to think that, and they're entitled to full respect for their opinions. But before I can live with other folks, I got to live with myself. The one thing that does not abide by majority rule, honey, is a person's conscience.
Love that line, that last line of his.
At this point in the presentation, we would like to open up the forum for audience questions, both for our panel, our actors, Michael, and I'm going to have Tom be doing all the running around.
You know, as a carpetbagger who went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, you all sure have a fine Bama accent.
Already.
Probably that's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And Scout, you did tremendous. But my question is this: did you all come from the South too, or have you had to practice this for this presentation?
The question is,
It's
do
great.
the actors come from the South, or do they have to? We'll have a dialect coach for this, but because these are good, experienced, trained actors, they already have a good head start on that. Unless somebody is from the South or Bay Area,
San Francisco.
Bay Area, California.
right?
Yeah.
Idaho.
But yes, we'll have a dialect coach who will make sure that
Yeah.
we're really dialed in, and with all the different levels, because it's not like everybody has the same kind of South Alabama accent in this. There's really a lot of different levels.
Yeah, it's a question I'm still asking about Atticus, because he grew up in Alabama just a short ways from Macomb, and he took his university in Montgomery, I think it was. So he really has never been out of the state appreciably. So I think you have to try to find that, but in a way that tells you that he's also got a certain amount of education, and I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but we may need you to come by our rehearsals and just talk for us.
Plus, I don't know if you I feel like the play has a universal kind of quality to it that makes it resist getting too mired in a thick accent.
It's not something to worry too much about.
Right, we'll have to explore that.
When you ask your questions with this mic, hold it up like you're going to eat it, right close to your mouth.
What does it taste like? Michael, as I understand what you were describing, how you're describing the layout of the play, is it accurate to say that you are looking at this play much as an Our Town setup where it's a spare stage?
I have used that very example as a good shorthand several times with designers and in production meetings that we've had. Unlike Our Town, which famously has no actual props, everything is mimed. I think the props, there aren't a lot in this play, but I think they're really important. The rifle that Atticus shoots the mad dog Tim with, the telephone. There's just a few, that the Bible in the courtroom scene that people swear on. So we'll have actual props, but in terms of the physical layout, not dissimilar. That is a good example, actually, yes.
Okay, if I might ask a second question, and that has to do with I think when Miss Honey was talking about, she thought that the play still had life for our time now, as opposed to 1932 or whatever it was, or when the play or the book was written in 1959. What is it about Atticus that makes him mild as opposed to being a fire-breathing trial lawyer? And isn't it true that today's lawyers would never approach a trial like this today? I don't know whether you are going to find yourself stuck with a book here in answering that question, or whether you're talking about a different sort of audience now than what Miss Lee was writing to.
I'm actually going to go to Dan again, because you said something recently about his what you perceived as his recent experiences, and I think that was very telling.
Well, everything, I reread the book recently, and everything I get from it is this sense of old world courtesy. And no matter who's on the stand, he's going to be polite and he's going to be courteous to whoever it is, no matter what the color of their skin or what their background, or if they're a detestable redneck spouting on the stand, he still treats that person as though they have tremendous respectability. So I think that's one thing that guides Atticus, and I think the other thing is that, about 4 years ago or so, I think he lost his wife, which you don't hear much about her. Jem barely remembers her. Scout remembers her not at all. But you get the feeling that that was a very loving marriage, and that was, I would imagine, a big blow to Atticus that he has had to kind of choke down and put aside in deference to the raising of his children. And I think that also has an effect on, we see him as a taciturn person, a person who has some friends in the county, but his family is really foremost for him. And I think that's another thing that kind of leads him to be a more of a perhaps soft-spoken or taciturn kind of guy. I think he's a thoughtful man, and not a firebrand lawyer. I think he leads by example, and he leads by quiet dignity and intelligence in a world where that's often lacking.
Yes. I think also from a historical perspective, if you're looking at this story set in the 1930s, Atticus also had to live amongst all these people. He's not a Clarence Darrow who gets to come on in from New York City and defend and put on a big show and then get the heck out of town. Atticus is with these people. This is where he grew up, and I think because I said earlier, Harper Lee's own father was an attorney and did defend African Americans. I think there was a real, there's a realization about that, and an actuality and an authenticity that he couldn't afford to be the fire-breathing attorney and still be living, in his community. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, that's a good point that's raised in the script as well. I hadn't thought of that.
My question is for Michael.
Yes.
And talking about how readers bring their own sort of imagination to the book, I kind of have this sense of Boo Radley as being this sort of mysterious figure in the background, and I was wondering if you actually have a cast member or if you plan to deal with him as dialogue.
No, we have a cast member. He's the last character to appear. He was pretty much the last character I cast. I don't think there's another character in dramatic literature whose part is so small but whose shadow is so long as Boo Radley. I don't even fully understand why yet, but I know that it's very important, and he is in the play, the final scene where he rescues Jem and Scout from the attack. It's a beautiful scene, and it's very short. So yes, he's cast, but we don't know, is he 28 or 58? Is he? We don't know anything. We have none of the normal clues that we get in casting a role. But I found somebody I'm very pleased with, and yes, it's an actual person. The Boo Radley house, however, is not on stage, and it answers your question in a way. I had to make a decision about that because there's the tree in front of the house that Scout first finds the gifts in. There's the door that Jem has dared to go up and touch. And think about it. If you had the actual Radley house and tree on stage, you'd have to put them upstage because they're big objects, houses and trees. They can't be downstage because then you wouldn't see the actors. And the kids would have to be at best in profile, reaching in, or facing upstage, so you wouldn't get to see the human experience of Scout discovering the gifts and Jem's fear and tapping that door and running. So I've chosen to put the Boo Radley house out, beyond what we call the fourth wall, in the audience, basically. So we'll get to see what the kids are going through, what the people are going through, which I think will be much more powerful. I'm also putting the audience and jury out in the audience as well, so that the attorneys will be able to address and break the fourth wall. So again, it's sort of sharing with the audience, and so the audience's imagination can be engaged.
My question is for Michael as well. That actually has to do with casting, because you're dealing with such iconic characters. We know them so well. And what was the process? You've clearly selected wonderful actors right here, but how long did it take you, and what were you looking for, and how many people did you talk to?
It takes a long time. We start early, like 6 months prior to rehearsal. We put out, we have a casting director, and we put out a casting call with Actors Equity and in the Theater Bay Area magazine. We on our own website, and we reach out to actors and invite them in for auditions. I select the scenes that I want people to read, and they actually read from the scenes to audition. They get the material in advance and prepare it. And then there's often what we call a callback, because you see a lot of people initially, like days and days of seeing people all day. And you narrow that list down, and you want to see people a second time because you need to, and to make sure and maybe go a little further, work with them a little bit. I think did you have 3 auditions, Olivia?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, 3. See, I was nervous about the kids. But that was about me, not about them. She was great the first time, the second time, the third time. It was all me, just like so desperately wanting to be sure about a process which is inherently uncertain. That's my life. So, does that answer the question?
Just a quick question about Dill being part a young Truman Capote. Is there any kind of influence or anything there that would make Dill a little bit different than the book?
That was a tough one because that's kind of a famous connection, and we know what Truman Capote looked like, and it's easy to imagine what he looked like as a boy, and it's even described in the book. And if I added into it, I have to find an actor who's really good and young and looks like that. I think I would have not been able to. So I cast the best actor for the part. He has really dark hair. He doesn't really look like Truman Capote. I probably won't dye his hair or do something like that. We'll just that'll be one of those, another case where your imaginations will have to help us.
Are you going to include Atticus's sister in the play? She was left out of the movie, and I thought she played a very valuable role in the book.
Yes. We don't get to add or subtract things from the play. Plays are, unlike movies, are very well protected by the Dramatists Guild, and you really can't change anything without permission from the author, which is really kind of great. So if we wanted to do something like that, it would actually be kind of illegal. So we won't be doing it, no. And it would be quite difficult, and it would, that almost adds another level of workshop to a rehearsal process that would, I think, require more time than we would have. And there's going to be things that some people miss. It's inevitable when adapting a novel to the screen or to the stage. You're going to miss the sister, and I'd like to apologize right now for that. But she's not there.
Is your adaptation different from the one they used for the film?
Does this adaptation differ from the one for the film, which was written by Horton Foote, a fantastic playwright, and generally acknowledged as one of the great screenplays adaptations of a novel? Yes, it is different. And this actually is a stage version that is very new by a man named Charles Towers. There's basically only been one stage adaptation that's been done for 50 years now. And this is a new one, and it's actually closer to the novel than the original stage adaptation. So I'm kind of excited about that too. But there's only one neighbor, Mrs. DeBose. There's none of the other neighbors. There's a lot that's not in there. It has to be. Yeah.
I wanted to ask the actors, because you guys are all in different stages. So Olivia, you're a young student, and Joe, you just graduated from college, and then Dan, you've done theater for a while in the Bay Area and around other places. What do you hope the audience comes away from this production?
You can pass it to Dan if you're not ready.
Do you want to go first? There you go.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah. Well, right now I'm focusing on wanting to find in every line an essential truth to it, so that I can. Spencer Tracy has a great line. Of course, he was a great film actor, but he says, "There's nothing to it. You hit your mark, you look the other guy in the eye, and you tell the truth." That's all there is to it. And so that's sort of where I am now. And I can't really think of what I would want the audience to take away from it, except if you work in that way, I think the audience is allowed to be taken on a ride, because there's nothing that jerks them out of the experience of seeing this story. So I think I would just like to know that they, unlike what Brecht wants, is to keep the audience from getting carried away by the play, I think is what he's after. I'd sort of like them to get completely involved in this play and what's going to happen next, and be able to feel that as much as possible we've found some elemental truths which I think are, so clear in the book. And even at just doing the reading tonight, I realize how much work it's going to be to bring those onto the stage. So I guess that. Any ideas, Joe?
I guess for me, we already saw earlier today that this was in our history. And it'd be nice to know that even for younger people to see that this is how America came through, how we went from very ugly times, and promising as we went up. So. I think for me, I just want to make sure that people have a good idea about this is how our culture was developed, throughout these stories, and why this play was even developed, or this novel was developed, because of what happened in our past, and and issues like that, And we already saw a whole lot of things from today from our moderator, and it's pretty important. I figured that I always like to think that my dad plays a lot of jazz music, and I don't think a lot of young people listen to a lot of good jazz anymore, So I'm always the type of person that likes to look into the music of the past, instead of a lot of the older stuff, something that's more a little bit more rich, and something that really likes to come up. So the same thing I like to bring onto the stage, bring out some more. Some different sides that people never even realized that happened, in the 50s or the 40s and 30s and stuff like that, And I think it's a good time, bring out some old stuff, bring out some really new things.
I really have a love for stories, so when I go to see a movie or a show or read a book, I always love getting sucked into the story. And I think, it would be great if the audience comes away from the show feeling sucked in, like they were part of the story, and they get a chance to, really feel like they're part of the story. And I would just love if the audience would feel that way.
Those are three great answers, and I'm not going to try to top them.
Questions? Any questions?
Well, Michael, you've already said that the script is the script, and there's not much you can do about that. But it sounds as though that the setting and the stage and how it's set up is something that you do have control over. So, is this setting that you're doing your original, or have you seen it elsewhere?
No, I haven't. Theater scripts give you dialogue and sometimes stage directions, and some more so than others. Eugene O'Neill is famous for like pages of hilariously detailed stage directions. This play doesn't have very much. Entrances and exits. Sometimes those are just implied by someone starts talking. Closer to Shakespeare in a way. Shakespeare gives almost no stage directions. So really, devising how you're going to do it is up to the production. And usually the director works with the designers first. Often starts with the set designer because that is the physical plane upon which you're hanging everything else. Costumes figure closely in behind that. Lighting usually comes late in the process. And sound depends. I've gone through several ideas. I would have loved to have had a gospel choir on stage for this at half hour when the audience is first walking into the theater. That was one of my first ideas. That is sadly has become just an idea that is a nice way into thinking about the play for me, but I'm not going to be able to do it. But you go through those stages, and often the first things you think about are more catalysts for where you end up going, rather than actually where you get. Yeah.
Questions? My turn? I have a question.
Oh.
The interesting one of the interesting things about To Kill a Mockingbird is that there has not, as popular as it is, one of our iconic novels, there has never been a dissertation written about it. And the number of academic articles are thin on the ground. It's just almost totally ignored by the literary, the academic literary, as opposed to, say, Catcher in the Rye or Huckleberry Finn, or maybe even a separate piece. Do you have any sense of why that might be? It probably says more about the academic world than it does about the novel, but do you have any sense of why that might be?
I know that there's a lot of resistance to the idea of it being a great book. Readers think it's a great book. The intelligentsia, such as, for lack of a better word, has some resistance to that. I've come across that. Have you, Meg?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree, and I think a lot of scholars tend to dismiss Harper Lee's work as simplistic, a simple little novel, and not look at it like the great American work of American literature, the way the readers have embraced it. So I don't know if that is one of the reasons why there is so little scholarly research, about Harper Lee's work. But I find it ironic because it is always at the top of, the banned book list. I'm wearing my I Read Banned Books bracelets, and Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is on both the teen version and the adult version. So for a book that has caused, not only created so much love and adoration, but also caused so much controversy, it's very interesting that there is so little scholarly research connected to it. But I do think it's because it has been dismissed as a simple little book.
There was a bit of a cloud over it of, the fact that Harper Lee never wrote another book. And somehow, for some people, that carries it's a fluke, or of course the somewhat persistent rumors that Truman Capote maybe wrote it, which I think has been pretty soundly discredited. But I don't know. I came across a line in the book the other day, and I'm like, oh my God. Describing Mrs. DuBose. Just one simple line saying, her face the color of a dirty pillowcase. And I go, that's a brilliant piece of writing. Just that sentence. Yeah. It's a whole evocative world in that one line. And that's good writing.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much to the panel. I know we're going to look forward to seeing the production. You just really whetted our appetites with this program, so thank you so much. And Thank you all for coming. We hope to see you again at Live from the Library. And, don't forget, if you love these programs, we would really appreciate your support. So thank you very much.
Thank you.